Please, open up!
Evening, officer. Ma'am, I need you to... I'm Judge Eleanor Price. This is my credential, and this phone is recording everything.
Understood.
The soft glow of holiday lights cast a dreamlike haze over the hushed streets of Cedar Creek Estates, a suburb where manicured lawns slept under a fresh blanket of snow. It was Christmas Eve, a night suspended in time, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of a peaceful morning. Inside these comfortable homes, families were winding down, the rustle of wrapping paper and the murmur of classic movies creating a symphony of domestic tranquility. But in one stately colonial home, this sacred quiet was about to be shattered. For one of the nation's most respected federal judges, this night of peace would become a crucible, a career-defining confrontation that would unearth a darkness festering just beneath the surface of this idyllic community. What began as a violation of one woman's sanctuary would ignite a firestorm, consuming careers, exposing a conspiracy, and forcing a city to confront the corruption it had allowed to grow in the shadows. This is a story with layers of deceit so intricate that each reveal will feel more shocking than the last. So if you're a fan of deep dives into the complexities of justice and injustice, you'll want to hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the very end. Judge Eleanor Vance was a woman forged in the fires of discipline and intellect. At 54, she was a veteran of the federal bench, her appointment to the United States District Court having been a landmark moment in the state's legal history. Her path had been one of relentless excellence. Top of her class at Yale Law, a fearsome and effective tenure as a federal prosecutor, followed by a distinguished period on the state appellate court. Her name was synonymous with integrity. Her legal opinions were masterpieces of clarity and reason, cited by scholars and lawyers across the nation. In a profession often mired in politics and compromise, Judge Vance was seen as an immovable pillar of the law. She lived a life of quiet purpose in a handsome but understated two-story brick home she had bought following a difficult divorce 5 years prior. This house, nestled on a quiet cul-de-sac, was more than just property. It was her fortress of solitude, the one place on earth where the immense weight of her judicial robe could be set aside, where she could simply be Eleanor. That Christmas Eve, Eleanor was embracing a rare moment of stillness. The day had been a pleasant marathon of video calls with her brother in Seattle and her elderly parents in Florida, their faces pixelated but their warmth palpable through the screen. She had prepared a simple, elegant dinner for one, poured herself a generous glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, and was now curled in a deep armchair by the hearth, a crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the walls as she lost herself in a historical novel. Dressed in cashmere lounge pants and a soft wool sweater, her hair unbound, she felt a sense of profound calm that had eluded her for months. The relentless pressure of her docket, the endless briefs, the life-altering decisions, all of it faded into the background, replaced by the simple comfort of a silent house on a snowy night. At approximately 9:15 p.m., the serene atmosphere was pierced by the sharp, unwelcome chime of her doorbell. Eleanor froze, her eyes lifting from the page. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her neighbors, mostly friendly but distant professionals, were well aware of her desire for privacy. The holidays for her were a time for solitary reflection, not social calls. A flicker of unease went through her. She placed her book down, padded quietly to the front door, and peered through the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens revealed 2 uniformed police officers standing on her porch, their forms haloed by the porch light, snowflakes melting on their dark blue shoulders. One was older, with a weathered face and a thick mustache, looking to be in his late 40s. The other was younger, leaner, with a restless energy that was visible even through the thick glass. With a lifetime of caution ingrained in her, Judge Vance opened the door only a few inches, the heavy brass security chain holding it fast. "Good evening, officers. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. The older officer's name tag identified him as Detective Marcus Cutler. He spoke with a practiced, almost bored authority. "Ma'am, we're responding to a noise complaint. One of your neighbors reported a disturbance." Eleanor felt a wave of confusion. The only sounds in her house were the crackling fire and the whisper of turning pages. The television was off, the stereo was silent. "A noise complaint," she repeated, her brow furrowed. "Officers, there must be a misunderstanding. I've been home alone all evening, reading." Detective Cutler's eyes scanned the narrow opening of the door, trying to see past her into the house. "Is there anyone else here with you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone implying he already knew the answer. "No," she replied firmly. "I'm alone." The younger officer, whose tag read Reed, stepped forward slightly. "Were you playing loud music earlier? Maybe had a few people over for a party?" Again, she shook her head. No, I've had a very quiet Christmas Eve by myself. I truly can't imagine what anyone would have heard. Officer Reed then made the first move that shifted the encounter from a simple inquiry to something more probing. Do you mind if we come inside and just have a quick look around? He asked, his tone casual, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. Judge Vance's internal alarms, finely tuned by decades in the legal system, began to ring. Why would that be necessary? She asked, her voice losing none of its composure. Detective Cutler spoke up again. Standard procedure, ma'am. We just need to confirm there's no ongoing issue and ensure everyone's welfare. Judge Vance held her ground. As I've stated, I am alone, and there is no issue of any kind. This is where the interaction began its dark descent. Detective Cutler's expression hardened. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification. Eleanor's mind, a library of legal precedent, instantly flagged the demand as unlawful. On what grounds? She asked. I am standing inside my own home. And you have no evidence that a crime has been committed. Cutler's voice took on a patronizing edge. It's procedure when we're investigating a complaint. Eleanor knew this was a lie. Police could not compel identification from a person not reasonably suspected of criminal activity, especially when that person was within the sanctity of their own home. She decided to press them. Could you tell me which neighbor filed this complaint? Or perhaps provide me with the incident number for the report? A flicker of uncertainty passed between the two officers. It was Reed who answered. That information is confidential at this stage of the investigation. Cutler added, we don't have the case number on hand. These evasions were amateurish, and to a federal judge, they were as revealing as a confession. Any legitimate police response would be logged, tracked, and accompanied by this basic data. Judge Vance articulated her position with the precision of a legal brief. Officers, without a warrant, without probable cause, and without exigent circumstances, you have no legal authority to enter my home, nor do you have the authority to demand my identification. I am not causing a disturbance, no crime is in progress, and I am now exercising my Fourth Amendment right to decline your request. Detective Cutler's face tightened, his professional mask slipping to reveal a raw, simmering aggression. He took a half step closer, his presence filling the small opening of the doorway. Look, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. If you have nothing to hide, you'll cooperate. It was a classic and legally baseless line of intimidation. At that moment, Officer Reed delivered the statement that would unravel everything. He chimed in, the neighbors called because they saw a suspicious individual lurking around the property earlier. They said someone matching your description was reported as being potentially dangerous. The pieces clicked into place in Eleanor's mind with sickening clarity. The noise complaint was a lie, a fabrication. This wasn't about a disturbance. This was about her presence. The suspicious individual was her, a federal judge, in her own yard, retrieving a package from her porch that afternoon. The potentially dangerous person was a 5'6" woman in her 50s, wearing a winter coat and boots. She was being racially profiled on her own property on Christmas Eve. In that instant, she made a decision. It was not a decision born of anger or fear, but of duty. She realized this moment was bigger than her. It was a test of the very principles she had sworn to uphold. She slowly, deliberately, reached into the pocket of her lounge pants and retrieved her cell phone. The screen illuminated her face as she found the camera app. The moment she raised the phone and the small red recording light blinked on, the demeanor of both officers shifted from aggressive to agitated. What do you think you're doing? Cutler snapped. Put that phone away. You can't record us. Judge Vance's voice was as steady as a rock. Actually, I can. I have every legal right to record police officers performing their duties while on my private property. Officer Reed, impulsive and reckless, lunged forward slightly, reaching for her phone. Eleanor snatched it back instinctively. Do not touch my property, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that had silenced courtrooms. She aimed the phone's camera directly at them and announced for the recording, the time is now 9:21 p.m. The officers are physically attempting to interfere with my legal right to document this encounter. It was then that Detective Cutler, blinded by his own prejudice and rage, made the catastrophic error that would seal his fate. This is a good neighborhood, he spat, his words thick with venom. It's full of decent families. People like you need to learn that you're being watched. The people who live here have a right to feel safe, and anyone who doesn't belong here is going to be dealt with. It was a declaration of war, a thinly veiled threat disguised as a community service announcement. Judge Vance met his gaze, her phone still recording. Please clarify, Detective. What exactly do you mean by people like me? Cutler sneered. Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean. The subtext was gone. The racism was now raw, overt, and being captured in high-definition video and audio. Officer Reed, not to be outdone in his own self-destruction, added his own threat. If you don't start cooperating right now, we're going to place you under arrest for interfering with a police investigation and disorderly conduct. The absurdity of the statement was breathtaking. Judge Vance calmly posed the question that dismantled their entire premise. What investigation, officer? The one based on a non-existent noise complaint. What crime has been committed here tonight that I could possibly be interfering with? Then she did something that neither officer could have anticipated. Looking directly into her own camera, she stated in a clear, unwavering voice, "For the record, my name is Eleanor Vance. I am a federal judge for the United States District Court, and I am currently being harassed, intimidated, and threatened with false arrest by 2 police officers who have no legal justification for their presence at my home." The reaction was not what one might expect. There was no dawning horror, no sheepish apology. Instead, there was pure, unfiltered disbelief, followed by a doubling down of their aggression. "You're a judge," Cutler scoffed, a look of contempt on his face. "You're lying." Reed laughed derisively. Federal judges don't live in normal houses in neighborhoods like this. Their skepticism was, in itself, the most damning evidence of their prejudice. Their worldview was so narrow, so steeped in stereotypes, that the truth was literally unbelievable to them. This was no longer a mistake. It was a willful persecution. Cutler demanded she prove it. "Let's see your judicial ID," he said, as if he had caught her in a lie. Eleanor refused. "I am under no obligation to prove my identity to you while you are unlawfully attempting to intimidate me on my own property," she stated. "Anyone can say they're a judge," Reed sneered. "We're not falling for that." It was at this juncture that Judge Vance, in an act of profound and perhaps undeserved grace, extended an olive branch. "Officers," she said, her tone shifting from defiant to diplomatic, "if you turn around and leave my property right now, this encounter ends here. I will not pursue the matter." She was offering them a clean escape, a chance to walk away from the professional abyss they were digging for themselves. It was a lifeline born of a desire to simply end the nightmare and return to her quiet evening. They were too arrogant and too foolish to take it. "We're not going anywhere," Cutler declared, his ego now fully in command. "Not until we've searched this house and confirmed who you are," Reed added, a smirk playing on his lips. "And I can guarantee you the neighbors will keep calling until we get this situation sorted out." The implication was clear. The harassment would continue, officially sanctioned or not. Judge Vance knew the conversation was over. "I'll need both of your badge numbers," she said, "and the name of your direct supervisor." Cutler waved a dismissive hand. "File a complaint if you want. It'll go straight into the trash. We're just doing our jobs." Reed chuckled. "Trust me, complaints from this part of town don't get a lot of traction at the department." It was a boast that would prove tragically ironic. She was indeed going to file a complaint, but it wouldn't be landing on a desk at their precinct. It would be landing on the desk of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. The standoff continued for another 10 excruciating minutes. 10 minutes of circular arguments, veiled threats, and Judge Vance's calm, methodical assertion of her constitutional rights, all captured on her phone. The 2 officers, in their hubris, were oblivious. They thought they were putting a suspicious person in her place. What they were actually doing was creating Exhibit A in their own federal prosecution and providing a live, narrated confession to a conspiracy that had terrorized a community for years. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you were in the right, but the person with the authority refused to listen? Let us know in the comments, because the phone call that Detective Cutler made next wasn't a call for backup. It was a call that would bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. As the recording on Judge Vance's phone continued to roll, Detective Cutler, frustrated by his inability to intimidate her, finally decided to call for reinforcement. He pulled out his own phone and dialed his sergeant, expecting to receive authorization to escalate the situation. What he didn't know was that the man on the other end of the line, Sergeant Ben Carter, had been waiting for a call like this for over a year. Carter was an old-school cop with 25 years on the force, a man who believed in the badge and was quietly horrified by what some officers were doing with its authority. He had been secretly compiling a file on Cutler and Reed, a shadow investigation born from a trickle of hushed complaints. He had noticed a disturbing pattern. Both officers seemed to specialize in generating calls in affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods, almost exclusively targeting residents of color. He had meticulously documented 17 separate incidents over 20 months, each one following the same script: a bogus complaint, an aggressive demand for ID, an attempt to conduct a warrantless search, and veiled threats when the residents resisted. Sergeant Carter knew that Cutler and Reed were protected. Cutler's father-in-law was a retired deputy chief with deep connections at City Hall. Reed's uncle was a powerful city councilman who chaired the police oversight committee. Carter understood that moving against them prematurely would be career suicide. His case would be buried, and he'd be reassigned to a desk in the basement. He needed something undeniable, something so egregious that not even their powerful connections could make it disappear. And on Christmas Eve, Detective Cutler had just gift-wrapped it for him. When Cutler explained the situation, expecting his sergeant to authorize a forced entry or an arrest, he was met with a cold, firm order. "Disengage, now," Cutler protested. "Sarge, we're in the middle of something here. This woman is—" Carter cut him off, his voice like ice. "I said disengage immediately. Both of you are to leave that property and report to my office at the station within the hour. Is that understood?" Judge Vance, still recording, could hear the tinny, angry sound of Carter's voice through Cutler's phone. She watched as Cutler's face contorted with frustration and disbelief. He snapped his phone shut and turned to Reed. "We're leaving." But his wounded pride couldn't let it go. Before turning to walk away, he pointed a finger at Judge Vance's door. "This isn't over," he snarled. "We know where you live now. The department will be keeping a very close eye on you." Reed, ever the loyal echo, added his own parting shot. "Judges aren't above the law. You made some powerful enemies tonight." These were not just the angry words of two rogue cops. They were direct threats against a sitting federal judge, a separate and serious felony, committed on camera. As their footsteps faded into the snowy silence, Eleanor finally closed and locked her door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to recede, leaving a profound sense of violation and cold anger in its wake. She immediately went to her study and began to work. With the precision of a seasoned litigator, she wrote a detailed multi-page affidavit, transcribing every word, noting every action, and time-stamping the sequence of events while it was still fresh in her mind. She then uploaded the video from her phone to 3 separate secure cloud storage accounts and emailed encrypted copies to her private email addresses. Her next actions demonstrated the chasm between an ordinary citizen and a person who intimately understood the levers of power. She did not call the local police department's internal affairs division. She knew that would be like reporting a fox to the henhouse. Instead, she made 2 calls. The first was to the special agent in charge at the nearest FBI field office. The second was to the emergency duty line for the United States Attorney's Office. She explained calmly and concisely that she was a federal judge who had just been subjected to a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and direct threats by 2 local police officers. By 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve, a team of FBI agents was already assembling, and the video file was being analyzed at a federal facility. The U.S. Attorney's Office designated the case highest priority, recognizing that the recording was not just evidence of a crime against a judge, but potential proof of a systemic pattern of civil rights violations. What unfolded over the next 3 days was a whirlwind of federal action that turned one ugly incident into a sprawling investigation into one of the most corrupt police units in the state's history. The FBI's first interview was with Sergeant Ben Carter. He didn't hesitate. He turned over his entire secret file on Cutler and Reed, providing the federal agents with a roadmap of their misconduct. Carter revealed his long-held suspicions that both officers were running a personal enforcement racket, targeting minority families who moved into wealthy neighborhoods. He explained how their connections had made them untouchable within the department, creating a culture of fear among officers who knew what was happening but were too afraid to speak up. The investigation exploded when FBI analysts secured warrants for the officers' phone records. They discovered that Cutler and Reed weren't lone wolves. They were part of a pack. Their communications revealed a coordinated network that included 2 lieutenants and a captain. They shared information about problem residents, coordinated their patrols to maximize intimidation, and celebrated their successful harassments in a group chat. One text thread from that very Christmas Eve was particularly damning. Reed had texted Cutler after they left Judge Vance's house. Should have just cuffed her and figured it out later, claimed she was a nobody. Cutler's reply was chilling. "Don't worry, we'll get another shot. People like her always slip up eventually." Then, the FBI's forensic accountants uncovered the true motive behind the harassment. It wasn't just about racism, it was about profit. Financial records showed that Detective Cutler was receiving regular payments from a private security firm that served several of the area's most exclusive gated communities. He was being paid off the books to provide enhanced patrols, which in practice meant harassing any person of color who didn't look like they belonged. Reed's corruption was even more direct. He was taking cash payments from individual homeowners who wanted specific neighbors monitored or pushed out of the neighborhood. The FBI found a ledger of these payments, with amounts ranging from a few $100s for a pretextual traffic stop to several thousand for a sustained campaign of harassment. The conspiracy reached the highest levels of the precinct when investigators zeroed in on their commanding officer, Captain Robert Sterling. Subpoenaed emails revealed Sterling's unofficial, unwritten policy to aggressively police minority residents in order to maintain property values and preserve community character. He had explicitly directed officers like Cutler and Reed to find any reason, any at all, to initiate contact with new minority homeowners, to create a paper trail of interactions, and to make their lives as uncomfortable as possible. The full, horrifying scale of their operation became clear when the FBI analyzed 4 years of dispatch logs. They identified over 250 instances where Cutler, Reed, and other members of Sterling's unit had responded to complaints that were demonstrably false, many of which the officers appeared to have generated themselves. Judge Vance's experience wasn't an anomaly. It was the standard operating procedure of a criminal enterprise masquerading as a police department. The federal investigation ultimately identified 58 families who had been subjected to these systematic campaigns of terror. These were law-abiding citizens, doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, military veterans, whose only crime was their success and the color of their skin. The financial and emotional toll was immense. Several families had sold their homes at a loss just to escape the constant surveillance and harassment. One family, headed by a prominent civil rights attorney, had endured 19 separate police interactions in less than a year, including repeated traffic stops outside their children's school. The campaign only ended when they packed up and moved to a different state. Another victim, a retired Army colonel, had been pulled over by Reed 8 times in 4 months for phantom traffic violations. When he filed a formal complaint, Captain Sterling personally dismissed it and warned the colonel about the legal penalties for filing frivolous grievances against police officers. The corruption the FBI discovered had even infected the community itself. Certain neighborhood watch groups had been co-opted, acting as civilian spies for the corrupt officers, reporting on the daily routines and visitors of their minority neighbors, feeding information that was then used to plan the harassment. This case was no longer about 2 bad cops. It was about a deeply rooted conspiracy that had poisoned an entire community's trust in law enforcement. What do you think is more dangerous? A single corrupt individual or a system that protects and encourages that corruption? The evidence the FBI was about to uncover would prove that the two are inseparable. As the federal investigation dug deeper, prosecutors unearthed a second, even more sinister layer to the conspiracy, transforming the case from a local disgrace into a national scandal. The FBI's forensic accountants, following the dirty money, discovered that the harassment scheme was merely the public face of a sophisticated money laundering and asset forfeiture operation. Cutler and Reed weren't just taking bribes, they were actively robbing people under the color of law. For the past 5 years, the 2 officers had perfected a predatory system using the state's asset forfeiture laws. They would execute a pretextual traffic stop on a minority driver, invent a reason to search the vehicle. The mythical scent of marijuana was a favorite, and then seize any significant amount of cash they found, claiming it was connected to drug trafficking. The victims, often vulnerable and without resources, were told they could hire a lawyer and fight the seizure in court, but Cutler and Reed knew that most would not. They deliberately targeted undocumented immigrants who feared deportation, young people with minor past offenses who wanted to avoid any contact with the justice system, and working-class families who couldn't afford the exorbitant legal fees required to reclaim their own money. The scale of the theft was staggering. Over their 5-year reign, the officers had illegally seized more than $400,000 in cash and assets. Instead of processing these seizures through official channels, they had created a shadow system. They would pocket the cash and sell the seized property, jewelry, electronics, even cars, through a network of criminal associates who operated pawn shops and used car lots across the state. This network was essential to their success. A local lawyer, a man named Jonathan Kessler, was on their payroll. He would file fraudulent forfeiture paperwork to give their thefts a veneer of legality, creating a paper trail of lies to cover their tracks. 2 brothers, owners of a chain of pawn shops, would buy the stolen goods for pennies on the dollar, reselling them for a massive profit and kicking back a share to the officers. The final piece of the puzzle was a used car dealer who specialized in title washing, taking seized vehicles, forging new documentation, and selling them to unsuspecting buyers. The federal grand jury heard one heartbreaking story after another. Elena Reyes, a single mother who cleaned houses for a living, tearfully recounted how Cutler seized $950 from her glove compartment, cash she had saved for months to pay for her son's dental surgery. Marcus Thorne, a self-employed contractor, described how Reed seized his entire collection of power tools, valued at over $4,000, claiming they were too expensive for someone like him and must be stolen. Thorne was unable to work for a month, nearly losing his business. The most egregious case involved an elderly couple, the Chens, who were driving with $25,000 in cash, their life savings, to purchase a used RV for their retirement. Cutler pulled them over for a broken taillight, seized the money, and told the terrified couple that their savings were now the property of the police department. The psychological devastation was just as profound as the financial loss. Dr. An expert witness for the prosecution testified that victims of this type of official corruption often suffer from long-term trauma, including anxiety, depression, and a complete loss of faith in societal institutions. They lived in a state of constant fear in the very communities they had worked so hard to join. The prosecutors, meanwhile, were building an ironclad case using the defendants' own words against them. Text messages showed Cutler and Reed joking about their victims, planning their stops, and arguing over how to divide the stolen money. In one exchange, after seizing several $1,000s from a landscaper, Reed sent a picture of the cash to Cutler with the caption, "Another good harvest today." Bank records exposed their lavish lifestyles. Cutler, on a detective's salary, had purchased a lakeside vacation cabin and 2 luxury vehicles. Reed had bought a 40-foot speedboat and had taken multiple overseas trips, all paid for with cash. Federal search warrants were executed simultaneously at a dozen locations. At Cutler's home, agents found a hidden safe containing $50,000 in cash and a collection of designer watches that were later identified as property seized from victims. Aboard Reed's speedboat, they discovered custom-built hidden compartments used to transport stolen goods. The investigation also revealed that the rot had spread far beyond Captain Sterling's unit. A lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Division, a woman named Harding, had been taking bribes to systematically bury any complaints filed against Cutler and Reed. She had altered reports, intimidated witnesses, and sabotaged investigations, acting as the conspiracy's internal guardian. Even the police union was complicit. Its president, Frank Miller, had used union funds to pay for the officers' legal defense in minor civil suits, all while publicly defending them as heroes who were being unfairly targeted by an anti-police agenda. The chain of corruption led all the way to City Hall. The mayor and several city council members had been repeatedly warned about rampant asset forfeiture abuse within the police department. But they had chosen to look the other way because the official portion of the seized funds represented a significant and reliable revenue stream for the city's budget. They had prioritized profit over the constitutional rights of their own citizens. Judge Vance followed the escalating investigation from a distance, a silent observer of the storm she had unleashed. The satisfaction of seeing justice in motion was tempered by a deep sadness for the countless victims who did not have her knowledge or her power to fight back. She knew that if those officers had knocked on any other door that night, their criminal enterprise would likely have continued unchecked. The case became a national media sensation. The story of the fearless judge who brought down a corrupt police department was irresistible. Protests erupted outside City Hall, with community leaders and activists demanding sweeping reforms and the resignation of every official who had enabled the corruption. The police department was left in ruins, its reputation shattered, and its ability to recruit new officers crippled. Community trust, especially in minority neighborhoods, had been completely obliterated. As the federal grand jury concluded its work, the sheer scope of the criminality was laid bare. This was not a case of a few bad apples. This was a diseased orchard. The federal grand jury returned a staggering 52-count indictment against 14 individuals under the powerful RICO Act, a law designed to prosecute organized crime. Cutler and Reed faced 35 felony counts each, including racketeering, conspiracy to violate civil rights, theft of government property, and money laundering. Captain Sterling was charged as a co-conspirator, the ringleader who had provided institutional protection for the scheme. The list of defendants included the corrupt internal affairs lieutenant, the lawyer, the pawn shop owners, and the car dealer. The indictment read like a screenplay for a gangster movie, detailing a criminal enterprise that had systematically plundered a community for years. The arrests were carried out in a series of dramatic pre-dawn raids by FBI SWAT teams. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of Detective Cutler being led from his luxurious home in handcuffs, his wife sobbing on the manicured lawn. Officer Reed was arrested while attempting to flee on his speedboat, a final pathetic act of defiance. The arraignment was a media circus. Both officers, stripped of their uniforms and their authority, pleaded not guilty, their faces grim masks of defiance. But their lawyers knew the truth. The evidence, particularly Judge Vance's crystal-clear video recording and their own self-incriminating text messages, was insurmountable. Federal prosecutor Evelyn Rios laid out the government's case in a blistering press conference, detailing how the conspiracy had stolen over $2.5 million from more than 120 identified victims. She announced the creation of a federal restitution fund to compensate the families who had been robbed. Burke's trial was a swift and brutal affair. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence that was as meticulous as it was damning. The jury watched the video from Judge Vance's doorway. They heard recordings of Cutler bragging to informants, and they saw the complex financial charts that traced the flow of stolen money directly into his personal bank accounts. His defense, which amounted to arguing he was just an aggressive cop doing his job, crumbled within days. After a 3-week trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Detective Marcus Cutler was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Officer Reed, who eventually cooperated in exchange for a lesser sentence, received 12 years. Captain Sterling was sentenced to 10 years for his role in orchestrating and protecting the conspiracy. In total, 11 individuals were convicted and sentenced to federal prison. The Cedar Creek Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree, a sweeping 5-year oversight program designed to root out the last vestiges of corruption and reform its policies from the ground up. Over $30 million in assets, including homes, cars, and cash, were seized from the conspirators and used to repay the victims. Judge Eleanor Vance continued to serve on the federal bench, her reputation for integrity now legendary. She never spoke publicly about that Christmas Eve, but she used her experience to become a quiet but powerful advocate for judicial and police reform. Her ordeal had been a terrifying glimpse into the abyss of unchecked power, but it had also reaffirmed her deepest belief that the law, when wielded with courage and integrity, is the most powerful weapon against injustice. Sometimes justice is not just about punishing the guilty, it's about restoring faith. It's about ensuring that the sanctuary of a home on a quiet Christmas night can never again be violated by the very people who have sworn an oath to protect it. As we reflect on this incredible story, what do you think is the most important lesson to take away from Judge Vance's experience? Is it the importance of knowing your rights, the power of a single individual to effect change, or the terrifying reality of how deeply corruption can take root? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this story as compelling as I did, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the pursuit of justice.